All right. Good afternoon, grade eights. I hope that you guys are all having a productive week so far, guys. We're back again. It's week 19, and we've got some more work on data handling to get through. This was a topic that we started briefly last week, just sort of revising some of the information that you should be familiar with, at least from here to some degree. So, today we're going to continue, but we're going to quickly uh, time to understand this topic from a bird's eye point of view, right? We want to understand this topic from a zoomed out perspective so that we can see how we end up focusing in on all of the individual sections, right? While we know that data handling is one individual section within your syllabus, it's broken down into a few different subsections. And we need to make sure that we are comfortable with each of those subsections to make sure that we are prepared for our tests or exams in terms of this topic. Okay. So today, what I want to do is sort of help us zoom out and see what are the subtopics that we need to understand within data handling as a chapter, as a whole. And then once we've done that, we're going to start talking about the first two sections. Okay. And I'm going to explain to you what those sections are shortly. And next week, we will dive into some more detail again. On some of those subsections that we list in today's lesson. Okay, so we're going to get started pretty soon, guys. I just want to give everybody else 1 or 2 more minutes to join us, and then I'm going to start. I can see that there's already a few of you here, so I hope that you'll be patient with me while we just wait for everybody to join us. In the meanwhile, guys, two things or three things actually. Number one, if you guys are comfortable with typing your first names into the comment box for me so that I can see who's here, I would really appreciate it. It just helps me to get familiar with the students that do join on a regular basis. Number two, make sure that you have all of your stationery. You are going to need a pencil and a ruler today. We are going to be drawing some rough outlines of a graph and doing some very just general sketching, but please make sure that you do have that stationery with you. Okay. If you have a calculator, take it out. There's no harm in having it nearby. We might not use it, but just have it if you keep one with you. And then number three, guys, at the end of every session that we have, I say to you guys as the students, you are more than welcome to come to me with any questions that you have regarding the work that we covered in our previous lesson, right? I show you guys different quizzes that we can use on iRainbow to help us sort of test our understanding of these individual sections of work. But if any of you have questions for me about the work that we've been covering or the tutoring just in general, guys, you are more than welcome to ask. Okay, I really do encourage you to ask any questions that you have, but it's completely up to you guys as to whether or not you do that. Okay. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen already so that we can start getting ready to get going with our lesson today. So you guys should be able to see my screen now, and I'm scribbling in all kinds of different colored pens, white, yellow, orange, green, and even blue. If at some point during today's lesson you cannot see what I am writing or hear what I am saying, you guys need to please let me know by just putting a message in the comment box. Okay, so what are we talking about today in this lesson, grade 8? Well, you guys can start by writing down today's date, which is the 27th of May, 2025, if you'd like to do so. But our heading for today is going to be understanding data handling. Understanding data handling. Okay, now this is a topic that you guys are going to do until grade 12, regardless of if you take maths core or maths literacy. You are going to be working with data that's collected in some form or another. Obviously, if you decide to take maths core or maths pure, You will continue with this at a slightly higher level, but regardless, guys, you are all going to be dealing with this. So I would recommend that you do take notes if you guys can. All right. So let's just have a quick discussion about what this section is about, and then we'll begin writing down some notes. So, when it comes to maths, guys, we have so many different topics that we can talk about, right? From shapes and angles in geometry to unknown values in algebra to working with trigonometry. And then we also have a dedicated section that we need to understand on data handling. It's no surprise that maths deals with the collection, organization, representation, and analysis of all kinds of information, right? And you guys might be used to um, already having information collected for you, and you just need to sort of look at it and interpret it. But as we move further into high school, you guys have got to start developing your understanding of this full process. So we no longer just focus on understanding information, but we also need to understand how we collect that information, right? Because believe it or not, there is a right and a wrong way to collect information. So the first thing we need to do is understand when there is something that we want to research and understand in depth, we need to understand how to collect information on this specific topic first. We then need to understand how we organize this data, right? How do we sort it out and make sure we group certain things together or our data into specific orders, depending on the kind of information that we've collected. Once we've done that, we have a section called data representation, which is essentially a topic talking about how we take this data that we've now collected and show it to other people, right? How do we present it to the people that we want to take this information to? Let's say, for example, you are calculating or collecting information on the cost of uh, basic groceries at different supermarkets, right? We look at ShopRite and Checkers and Pick and Pay and Woolworths and any other major sort of supermarket chain you can think of. If I collect all of this information, there's a reason that I'm collecting it, right? It's because I want to try and identify some kind of pattern, some kind of um, hidden trend in our information that I want to sort of bring to light and show to certain people in order to maybe improve something, to fix something, to change something. There can be a whole host of reasons why we would start this process. But if I want to take my information that I've collected to a meeting with all of these big supermarket chains, for example, right, with Woolworths and Checkers and so on and so forth, I need to be able to display the information in a way that is easy for everybody to understand and easily spot the trends or patterns that we are trying to discuss, right? Sometimes when we collect information, these patterns and trends are not so obvious. So we represent our information in pie charts or bar graphs or different kinds of tallies, right? We can use a whole host of different tools to help us put information on display. And finally, once we've done that, we need to be able to analyze and interpret the information that we've collected, right? There's no point in spending all of this time and energy collecting information if we don't have any intention of trying to understand what it's telling us on a deeper level, right? So the last section is then about interpreting data, spotting trends, predicting future outcomes, right? And some of you might be sitting there and thinking this is a really isolated topic, right? It's just got to do with maths and that's it. When in reality, guys, this applies to pretty much every other industry or section of work that you could think of. If I'm a business major, right? If I'm studying business and I want to understand um, how my income every month changes over a period of time so that I can predict future incomes, I would use this data collection and analysis. If I was a scientist and I was trying to pay attention to how the climate in South Africa is changing over a period of 10 years, I would need to go through the same process, right? It doesn't matter whether it's science or business or medicine. Every single industry in the world has some aspect that is dedicated to collecting information so that we can understand what's happened previously and try to, predict what's going to happen moving forward. So that's what this section about data handling is all about. So let's quickly dive into it a little bit deeper. Um, First, we're going to start by discussing the different sections that we need to discuss and get a better understanding of, right? And each section is going to have its own dedicated bit of information. So the very first step that we need to pay attention to is data collection, right? How do we collect our data? How do we make sure that the information we're collecting is correct, it's valid, it's accurate, and it's not biased? Number two, once we've done that, we have a section on data organization, right? How do we take this information that we've collected and put things into groups or put them into, ascending or descending order or some other kind of order? How do we prepare this data to be used? Section number three is then what we discussed um, when we were talking about graphs and showing our information to other people. This is called data representation, right? It's great that we can work with numbers and organize things, but sometimes when we put something into a visual context, it's much easier for us to derive or understand different patterns that are happening that we can't see when we're simply looking at numbers alone. The last section is going to be data analysis. Data analysis and interpretation. Okay, so these are the four independent sections that we need to make sure we dive into so that we can understand every part of this process, right? So that if we are given information, we can immediately spot if information is invalid because it's been collected unfairly, for example, right? Guys, this section of work is so applicable that it even applies to things like our elections, right? Across the world. Whether we're talking about South African elections, the US elections, it doesn't matter. Information is collected, right? We get everybody to vote on ballots. We then organize these ballots by keeping them in boxes for certain areas that are then shipped to a counting facility. The data is then put onto graphs and all kinds of other images that we see on the news, right? Trying to quickly show us what's happening in the election. It's often represented in horizontal bar graphs to show who's furthest ahead in the election, who's closest to winning, right? And then we have experts that analyze all of these bits of information and analyze the context in which these elections are happening, for example. So these four steps, for example, even apply to the world of politics and economics, right? So, with that being said, let's start with section one. We want to understand a little bit more about the world of data collection. How do we collect data, make sure that it's valid, it's fair, and it's unbiased? Okay. Guys, please do take note that this lesson will include a fair share of writing. If I could summarize it more so that we could avoid that, I definitely would. But this is just one of those topics where we have to understand all of the fundamentals, and unfortunately, that's in the form of a lot of information. Okay, so what are some of the things that we want to consider when collecting data? So, when collecting data, consider the following. What are some things that we need to keep in mind when we want to collect information for some kind of official use, right? I'm not just talking about discussing things with your friends. I'm talking about if we want to have businesses one day, we need to take information to somebody important. The first thing that we need to consider, A, is the random nature of samples. The random nature of samples, right? What do I mean by this? Well, let's say, for example, we're trying to determine what the most popular soccer team in South Africa is, right? If I specifically go and pick my three friends, and I use them to figure out who's most popular. Well, that's not exactly a very fair representation of the population at large, right? Because friends support. We talk about this very often. Maybe all of them support the same team that I do. So, uh, number one, your samples must be random. So, for example, what I could do is maybe start something like an online survey, right? I send out a link on Instagram and I say to everyone, guys, we're trying to do some research. Click on the link and go and pick your favorite soccer team in South Africa, right? This way, anybody that's interested can throw their opinion into the mix. You are not um, skewing your information by choosing who gets to give you answers. Okay. Let's say, for example, you wanted to know who the most popular kid in school is, for example, and you really want to be the answer. You want to be the most popular kid. You can't go and ask only the people that like you who they think the most popular is, right? We need to ask everybody so that we can truly see if you are the most popular. So, it's very important that when we collect information, our sources or the people or places that we collect information from are not chosen for some specific reason. They must be random in nature, right? Number two, the sample size. So when we decide to ask who is the most popular soccer team in South Africa, if I only ask the 10 people in my class, that is not fair to say that those 10 answers represent the opinion of the entire South African population, right? The group that I'm asking isn't big enough. So we need to consider our sample size. Now, usually, this is not a hard and fast rule, guys, but we usually like the number of samples or the number of data points that we collect to be greater than the number 12, right? We want to have more than 12 answers. Otherwise, we normally say that your information just is not valid. Why? Because you are trying to tell me that the opinion of 10 people represents the opinion of the 65 million people in South Africa, right? And that's not really fair. So we need to consider that the people we select are random. The number of people we select must be relatively big, right? What else do we need to know? And this depends on the sort of setting that we're in. We need to know um, how do I put this? Sorry, guys, let me just find the words that I want to use quickly. We need to know how data was collected, right? So, in other words, we want to know the data collection method. We want to know how information is collected because some ways are more reliable than others. So, for example, if we hold the South African elections and we just ask everybody to vote over WhatsApp or Instagram, right? This wouldn't be a very respected way to collect information. We know that all kinds of WhatsApp accounts can be hacked. We know that people can create extra WhatsApp accounts just to get more than one vote, and so on and so forth. So, the data collection method is very important. And this is basically how data was collected. Right? So that's why when we do voting in South Africa, voting is usually done in person, and you are given a black or blue ink mark on your fingernail. Right? They mark your fingernail with ink so that you can't go back and try and vote a second time because that would be unfair. Right? So, how we collect the data is very important to understand. What else should we know about the data collection process? We need to know the collection time of data, right? We need to know when data is collected. Let's say, for example, um, I want to know who the most popular soccer team in South Africa is now in 2025. If I complete all of my data collection and I get thousands of people to vote, but I only release my information in 2026 and say, guys, the most popular team is XYZ. Do you guys think that that would be fair? Well, remember, that's not necessarily going to be completely fair. Why? Because we need to keep in mind that data changes over time. Okay, that's very important to keep in mind. Data changes over time. So if I hold elections now in 2025 and I spend lots of time counting and collecting and analyzing my data, and in 2027 I say, guys, the most popular president is this person, that wouldn't be fair because there's a lot that can happen in the space of 6 months. Right? And that can completely make your information, your data, invalid. So we need to make sure that the time we spend between collecting information and then sharing information is as short as possible, right? So that our information that is often time sensitive is preserved. It's still valid, right? Okay, so guys, these are things that we all have to consider when we're trying to collect data, even when we are analyzing the data of other people, right? And you guys, believe it or not, have seen examples of this all over the place, right? For example, if you guys have access to social media, maybe um, you go onto YouTube, for example, right? And you see a video titled "The Most Popular Rugby Team in South Africa" or "The Most Popular Soccer Team in South Africa," right? When we watch these videos, we know that in 1 year's time, in 2 years' time, this information could very easily change, right? Think about the music that you guys listen to. Maybe right now you guys like listening to a specific genre of music. right now there might be somebody that is very popular in that genre, but in 6 months' time, a new artist can pop up and take their place, right? Sorry about that, guys. So these are things that we need to consider as we collect our information. Do we have any questions on this so far, grade 8, or are we all on the same page? I haven't seen any questions yet, so I'm going to assume that everybody's okay for now. Right. So if this is section one and we understand what we need to consider when we are collecting data, right? We also need to know one last thing. Uh, Let me just think. Yeah. Okay, no, that's fine. That's a good list for now. All right. So that means we can now take a look at the second section. Once we have worried about data collection and we know that our information is fair and valid, we can then only then move on to organizing and representing our data, right? So at the end of the section, before we move on to point number two, I want you guys to write um, information must be collected timeously from credible sources, right? Must be collected timeously from credible sources in large enough quantities through a fair process, through a fair and random process, or let's try to say, sorry, through a fair from a fair process to be considered valid data. Okay, you must know this information. All right, guys, so I haven't seen any questions, which tells me that I can move on to the next section. Okay, if you guys have learnt about this in class already and there's one or two things that you want to add onto the list, that's absolutely okay. Remember, these lessons are supplementary. So, if we move on to section number two, data organization, what does that look like? Right. So, what has happened at this point in the process, grade eights? We've gone and decided that we want to research a specific topic, and we have done all of our data collection properly, right? Making sure that our samples are random, that we have a fair number of samples, that we've collected the information fairly and accurately, and that it's been done in a time sensitive process, right? We've considered all of this, and now we have got valid data. Step number two now becomes data organization, right? And what does this mean? Once data has been collected, It can be organized in a variety of ways. Okay. What are the different ways that we can organize data, guys? First thing, when we're looking at our information that we've collected, we want to make sure that we remove any invalid data points, right? So if we are busy doing doing our data collection and we realize that we put somebody's answer in twice by mistake, or we see that somebody that wasn't supposed to vote gave their vote, right? We want to remove that invalid data point. Otherwise, it's going to affect our data analysis later on down the line. Then, data can be sorted into categories, right? Categories, groups, orders, or styles. When we have all of this information that we've sort of sorted now, we make sure the data is put into easily accessible formats. Easily accessible formats like tables, stem and leaf plots, or tallies. Okay, and point D, guys, the last thing that I want to write down for this section is that it's no surprise that a lot of these processes are already digital, right? A lot of data collection happens using some kind of softwares on computers and so on and so forth. So it's just important to remember that the reason why technology plays such an important role is because of its speed, right? Computers can do things that we can't very quickly. Number two, digital forms of information are very easy to share with other people, right? Instead of bringing you a full file of information, I can send you a 100-page PDF, for example, right? And on top of that, guys, calculation. A lot of the time when we are doing data collection, while we can work with some small samples, right, like 10 data points or 20 data points, there are also bigger kinds of data sets that we need to be able to work with, like the votes of a country, right? Or all kinds of things where we have sample sizes that can easily exceed 10,000 data points. And when that's the case, it's way too slow uh, and sometimes unreliable for us to do that by hand. And so we instead choose to do this through the use of or through computers and softwares, right? Digital systems of sorts. Okay, so this is what we need to know when it comes to data organization, right? We want to make sure it's just laid out, it's put in the right order, it's put into some kind of readable format that we can use. So that if I need to now take this information and send it to a coworker, right, that's going to do the next step, they understand what's going on and they don't have to keep phoning you or talking to you about what you have done with your organization. That's the whole point of organization, guys. It's putting things into a format that is easily understandable by most of the people around us. Right. Point number three, we want to take another look at data representation. Right? And let's discuss this again very briefly. If I've collected all of my information now and I've sorted it into a logical format and to in an understandable and readable format, what is the next step in this data handling process? Well, the next step is going to be for me to take this information and now display it, right? For two reasons. We put it into a visual format for others to be able to read, but we also do this for our own personal analysis. If we can see things visually, it's sometimes easier for us to spot all kinds of trends and patterns in our data. Okay. I'm going to try and leave the last parts of section two on the screen for you guys to copy while moving on. But let's write some notes for section number three. Data can now be presented in a visual format for two reasons, right? Number one, or let's rather say point A, uh, it is easier to spot trends and patterns. It is easier to spot trends and patterns for analysis. Right? And B, it's an easy, understandable format. It's an easy, understandable format for external users. So if I take my information and I put it into a PowerPoint for people that I'm presenting the information to, it will be easier for them to understand the visuals rather than look at these lists and lists and lists of numbers that only I had the chance to work. Okay. So what are our data? Uh, let's say the representation formats, different visual styles that we can display information in. Right, so these are our representation options. How do we want to display our information? Okay, I'm going to give you guys a second to copy because we are doing a lot of writing. Right. So now we want to take this information and put it into a visual format for the two reasons that we listed above. So, what are the different visual formats that we can use, guys? And this is where things start to get a little bit more intense because you guys need to know why we would pick these different graphs or visual formats, right? And then be able to also draw them accurately. So the first thing we can use is bar graphs, and there are many variations, right? We can talk about a normal bar graph. We can talk about a compound bar graph. And some of these you guys might not know just yet, and it's okay. We are going to take some time to understand them, right? Compound bar graph, we get a stacked bar graph, and technically we have a horizontal bar graph. Right. So there are many variations of the same kind of graph. What does a normal bar graph look like? It's just normal bars, right? Um, what does a compound bar graph look like? This is when we have multiple bars attached to one another, right? Like you can see that I've just drawn very roughly over there. What is a stacked bar graph? Well, this is when we decide to have multiple pieces create our vertical bars, right? Sometimes they are separated into many sections, like so. This is what we would call a stacked bar graph. And guys, unsurprisingly, a horizontal bar graph is just bars that travel horizontally. Okay, like so. We're obviously going to draw these properly with rulers at a later stage. I'm just trying to show you guys what these different bar graphs could look like. Okay. Sometimes the names aren't as recognizable as the pictures. Number two, we can use histograms. Histograms are like bar graphs, but they have no spaces in between bars. What else can we use? We can use line charts, right? Or line graphs. Line charts or graphs. D, we can use pie charts, right? Pie charts are often very helpful. Can you guys think of other formats that we can use to represent our data? If you have any suggestions, please let me know, guys. But these are sort of the very common ones that we use on a regular basis. There are definitely some more that we can use, but these are generally the most popular formats, like I said. All right. Representation options. So we can sort of draw or show our information using these methods that we've just listed. Right, another very popular one, guys, that I've just remembered now is a scatter plot. This is going to become more important next year in grade 9 if you haven't discussed it yet. A scatter plot and dot plot. Scatter plots and dot plots are also quite a useful way to show information. And F, Um, Box and whisker diagrams are also common in this section of work in the world of statistics, right? Box and whisker diagrams. And there are many, many, many other kinds of methods that we can use to show our data. But like I said, guys, and we're just going to write a point at the bottom over here. You must choose a representation format that works well with the characteristics and style of your data. Okay. You really must choose carefully. For example, guys, it would be a bad idea to pick uh, bar graphs, for example, when we want to represent continuous data, right? Remember, and again, we will dive into this at a later stage, but we've got continuous and discrete data, right? We need to know the difference between these types of data because, for example, continuous data looks very good on line charts, but discrete data is better represented using compound charts. This is not, again, a 100% surefire rule, but remember, you've got to choose the way you represent your information very carefully. All right. So I hope that that makes a little bit more sense. If you guys are wondering what a scatter plot is over here, a scatter plot is a normal set of graph axes, but the information is plotted as data points, as dots, right? And oftentimes, you guys will learn about this later on. Uh, we use this for things like college admissions, right? When we think about the people that get accepted to university, we're using something like this. We talk about lines of best fit and so on and so forth. That's just what this scatter plot is referring to. Okay. I don't expect you guys to understand this yet, but we've got one last section, and guys, we've got 10 minutes left, so let's get through this quickly and then we will be done for the day. The final section that we need to talk about this afternoon is going to be section number 4, which is data analysis and interpretation. Right. It's the final section that we need to consider in this entire process when it comes to thinking about data. Right. So we can use a wide variety of calculations to help us understand data on a more intricate level. Some of these calculations or values are listed below. So we've now put our information into different kinds of graphs, but how do we now understand this information on a more intense level? How do we see the things that are not super obvious at first? Well, A, we can use the mean, which is the average. We chatted about this last week, right? It's sometimes referred to as X bar, just the letter X with a flat line drawn on top of it like so. That is X bar. It's referring to the average of a data set. The median, right? What is our median? The middlemost value. Again, we spoke about this last week, guys. So if some of you were not around for that, you might want to go and take a look at our recording from last week's lesson. C, we need to talk about the mode. This is the most frequent value data sets, right? The number that pops up most commonly. But what else can we understand? We can talk about the range. E, you guys will later learn about what we call the interquartile range. Okay, again, we will go and discuss a lot of this in some more depth soon. Right, the interquartile range. We can also take a look at outliers, for example, right? Those data points that seem to be so different in comparison to the rest. So, guys, please, please, please understand very quickly. This is not a small chapter of work, and I hope that today's lesson is, helped you to look at this topic and see its individual components that we use when it comes to dealing with data that we have collected, right? A lot of people see data handling as just this section, just being able to calculate mean, median, mode, range, and so on and so forth. But in reality, it's a lot more than that. Teacher asks you to draw a graph. They are testing your understanding or your ability to use the correct style of graph or data representation based on the data that you are working with. We are testing if you are able to tell us if the information that we're using to make certain conclusions is valid, right? Is it um, time sensitive information? Has it been collected from random sources? Has it been collected fairly, right? Was it done over a reliable platform, like through an online survey, or was it just done using comments on an Instagram post? All of these things matter. So I hope that this has given you a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of what this topic looks like. And even though your teacher might not say to you, please tell me 5 different ways I can show my data visually. Your teacher will give you information and say, pick the best graph to use to represent this information and draw it accurately, right? Whether or not you realize that all of these sections are being tested, whether directly or indirectly. So it's information that need to be aware of. All right. Now, guys, um, I'm not going to be doing a quiz with you today because I first want to cover some information with you next week. We want to talk about these different formats that we use, right? Bar graphs, line graphs, and so on and so forth. And then we're going to go and take a look at a quiz. But please remember that you guys can still go onto iRainbow. Okay, and I'm going to quickly write something here at the bottom for you. If you go onto iRainbow, if you want to go and take a look at the different quizzes that you can try, you can go straight into the section called data handling, and you can try any of the 3 or 4 quizzes that come up, right? There are 4 independent sections. So you guys can go and take a look. Remember, this is going to break up into 4 sections. So you can go and explore and test yourself. I obviously don't know how much every single one of you has covered in this section in class, but we will do a quiz next week once I've taught you the appropriate information. All right. Do we have any questions, grade 8? This has been a lot of information, and I really hope that it's been valuable. I really would like to hear that you guys found your last hour that you spent with me as valuable. But guys, we are done for today. The lesson is officially over, and I need to go and teach the grade 9s. Please remember that the recordings of this lesson are available on Facebook or on YouTube, so you can go back and watch this for free whenever you want. It's at your disposal. All right. But guys, that's going to be it for today's lesson. I haven't seen any questions, so I just want to quickly remind you one last time. Our next lesson is going to be next week, Tuesday, again from 4:15 in the afternoon to 5:15. Okay. If you guys have questions about this topic, you are more than welcome to come and ask me about them at a later stage. But please remember, if you go onto iRainbow, if you click on the quizzes, it is not just a quiz. Okay. It will bring up PDFs and resources, sometimes even videos that can help to develop your understanding of this topic if you are still a little bit lost. Okay. Grade 8, that's going to be it for today, guys. I haven't seen any questions, so I'm going to call it for today. I wish you all the best of luck for the remainder of your week and for any exams or tests that you have coming up. But, guys, I will speak to you all again next week. All right. Thank you so much, grade 8s. Enjoy, guys.